So I have this very daunting title this morning, which is Nonprofits Advocacy and the Meaning of Life. And you know, California Association of Nonprofits is a statewide advocacy organization, kind of like a chamber of commerce for nonprofits. And you don't usually think of a chamber of commerce as having much to say about the meaning of life, but we do actually. All right, so I'm going to start by telling you 3 stories. Right. So first story is about battered women's shelters. When battered women's shelters were first getting started in California, um, it was not against the law to hit your wife. Right. So the fact is the police were going to houses because the neighbors had called about shouting and noise, and there would be nothing that they could do. So at that time, people in these shelters for battered women there was kind of a divide, and some people felt like, you know, we have to stay out of politics. We have to stick to helping women who have been in battering situations. And other people felt like we have to stand up for them. We have to try to get this law changed, even though it's going to be messy to be involved in politics. And I think both of those choices were legitimate choices, but I think we also appreciate today the fact that it is now not just a misdemeanor, but in fact a felony to hit your wife or your husband or your domestic partner, and the police have tools to work with now that they didn't before. And I think that story is kind of emblematic about how we have to not only most of the time, we can't just help people, we also have to stand up for them. Okay, the second story is about shelters for homeless youth. And shelters for homeless youth, you know, there used to, in the olden days, you know, kind of, there wasn't really thought that there was anything to do about homeless youth. They were just kind of, you know, just kind of ignored, or people tried not to think about them. But then it became possible to open shelters for homeless youth. And the federal government supported those shelters. And they did it by paying for each child that was reunited with his or her family. So for, you know, if you reunited 10 kids with their families, you got a certain amount of money, 11 kids, it would be more, etc. So I'm sure that, you know, and there were many, hundreds of nonprofits all around the country started up doing this kind of work. And I'm sure that you're already thinking to yourself, but like, wait a minute, you know, what if going back to their family isn't the best choice for a kid? Like maybe that's not a safe situation for that particular child. And so nonprofit organizations doing these shelters for homeless youth had to do much more than just help such children. So first of all, they did have to help such children. They had to make sure that they reunited as many families as they could, partly because their income depended on it. Secondly, they also had to help kids for whom that was not the right choice. That wasn't a safe choice for them. And then because they didn't get any government money for that, they had to raise private money through private contributions and from foundations to make it possible for them to do that work. And thirdly, they had to stand up for those kids also and try to get that funding model changed at the federal level. And one of the things that happened is that law to change the payments from just families reunited to the best situation is determined for a particular child, that law passed in Congress and then it was vetoed by the president. So it took a change in the United States president to be able to make that very simple, common sense change in how to help young people that are in a difficult situation. So to me, that was really a lesson for me watching that unfold, that, you know, it isn't even enough to stand up for them. You know, we also have to mobilize our voting power. And then the third story I have is I used to work at what was this, like 100 years ago. I was the research assistant at a nonprofit research company, nonprofit research lab, or whatever the word is. Anyway, and we were doing this 3-year study, and the study was asking the question, what makes a community mental health center effective, right? So that CMHC is a community mental health center. And so this organization was looking at a lot of variables. For example, do they tend to work better in rural, suburban, or urban areas? Does it work better to have a doctor in the head compared to, say, a person who is more of an administrator? Is there a certain size they have to get to be kind of more stable, or is any size work? And so it was a very interesting query, especially because all of us get an unending stream of advice from pretty much everybody that we ever run into about how to run our nonprofits. So in any case, then I quit that job. And then a few years later, I ran into my executive director, and I was so happy. And I said, so tell me, what was the answer? What did you find out in the study? And she said that what makes a CMHC successful is the amount of time that the executive director spends in the state capitol. And more and more, I've come to understand the truth of the fact, which is that advocacy is not just the right thing to do for the people that we work with, but it's also a business strategy. And I've adopted the motto, one law is worth 100 grant proposals. And when you think about a lot of the work that we do, helping children with disabilities, helping people with Alzheimer's, putting on free concerts in the park, cleaning up wildlife, cleaning up, wildland areas, all this kind of work that is federally or government or state funded, all of that was fought for by nonprofits that took their case to the state capitol and made sure that funding got there. So I think that today government and nonprofits are in this symbiotic relationship where nonprofits, if you take us overall, get 30% or so of our money from government, but on the other hand, about 30% of government services in many cases are delivered by nonprofits. So, we're not just dependent on them, they're dependent on us as well. So the question is, if advocacy protects our community members, changes funding models, and is a successful business strategy, why wouldn't we advocate? And I believe that the answer is that we don't know how to do things that are simple. So, back when I was at my old job, which actually was at Compass Point, I used to say to lawyers who would tell us things like, it's illegal for nonprofits to advocate. And I would say, yeah, I get that it's legal, okay? But so I get in my car, I drive to Sacramento, I park and I get out of the car, then what do? I don't know, right? So it's not that I was afraid to advocate, I didn't know what that meant or how to figure out. And it just seemed like such a big project. So I thought it would be better today to tell you some simple ways to advocate for the people that you work with, and not just for them, but for your own organization as well. So the first thing I think is really important is to join a local advocacy organization like IECC. And I do want to say that IECC is not paying me to say that. Okay, I wish they were, but they aren't. Right? Are you paying, Susan? Oh, okay. Like sometimes they say, like, I don't know, like movie stars get paid for the number of times they mention that shampoo or something like that. I feel like I should get paid for that anyway, but and here's an example, okay, of there are many such local advocacy coalitions in the state of California. And here's one example in San Francisco. It's called the Human Services Network. And they're many years older than IECC, so they've had many more years to work on their advocacy strategies and getting to know elected officials. But they recently got the San Francisco County Board of Supervisors to give an across-the-board cost of doing business increase of 3.5% to every nonprofit contractor. So that's millions and millions of dollars. And of course, if you were one individual nonprofit, going to the Board of Supervisors and saying, look, the cost of doing business has gone up, give us some more money, they would have just swept you aside, right? But so that's an example of what collective advocacy can do. And also collective advocacy can stand up for nonprofits in a way that sometimes nonprofits can't themselves. So that's why I think you should join both IECC, and there are also often local coalitions of particular organizations. So they're often, for example, an association of mental health care providers or an association of arts organizations. And I think that those are equally important to join because I think, again, they know what's happening. Okay. And also to tell you the truth, joining such associations doesn't cost very much money. Right? So it's not like it's a big budget expense. Okay, and then the second thing I think you should do is you should join a statewide association in your field. Like, so for example, if you're an arts organization, there just isn't any better place than Californians for the Arts to learn about how the new laws are affecting paying, for example, musicians and actors. And if you can't afford their dues, then at least get on their mailing list. All right, because, and this is the reason why, because you can't necessarily keep track of all the things that are happening that are affecting your organization. But somebody like Californians for the Arts, or the California Association of Museums, or the California Association of Food Banks, they keep track of that, and they will let you know when there is something that needs your attention. So for example, I mean, this was interesting. There are some couple of interests. So, I mean, so for example, I didn't know this, but last year there was a big bill related to the selling of kangaroo meat in California. You may not even know that kangaroo meat is currently banned in California, but in most states it's legal. I mean, I was clueless. Okay, so so in any case, there was a bill in the state legislature to remove that ban and to allow kangaroo meat to be sold, either as pet food or as food for humans. And so, if you were on, for example, the California State Humane Society list, you would have been told about that, and you would have seen that, and you would have had a chance to know what bill it was and who you should call or send a letter to stand up for it. And 2 years ago, there was a very interesting bill related to the use of ivory in musical instruments. And California has had a law for a long time, for example, that I think it's pieces that are of ivory that are more than like 60 years old and are less than 2 inches or something like that, right? That if you're a California, if you own an instrument that has a piece of ivory in it like that, that's legal to have. But what was happening was that musicians were taking their instruments and going out of state, let's say to play a concert in New York, and then their instruments were being seized as they came back because they were, the law had, even though it was legal to have your instrument in California, it was not legal to bring that instrument back into California. So this is a very small thing, but if you had been a member of the California Association of Symphony Orchestras, right, then you would have heard about that and you would have had a chance to weigh in. So I realize that those are two things that you probably wouldn't take up as the #1 cause, but I thought they were just kind of illustrative of how these statewide associations like us at Cal Nonprofits pay attention to reading all these crazy laws and figuring out the ones that we really need to be thinking about. And someone's put in the chat, Rise, that IE Rise is another local coalition that's also a good example of something that you can join. It doesn't cost anything, and it can keep you in touch with a lot of local happenings. And I know that Susan and many of the other IECC board members serve on the committees or chair the committees of IECC. So that's another great example. Thank you for the person that wrote that in the chat box. So I forgot where I was at. Okay, let me see here. Oh, just one more thing. So just as so about calling your members. So this last year, we sponsored a bill in California that would provide some transparency to donor advised funds. And this is another example of kind of a technical bill that you might not have heard about if you weren't a Cal Nonprofits member or a member or on our mailing list. And so, so what would happen is, this is what's helpful because we have members, and I believe now 56 of California's 58 counties, that when that bill came to a particular committee, we can look up in that committee and see who the members are and where they're located. Then we look on our member list and we see who are our members in that person's district. And then when we ask those people, can you call this person and say, you know, yes on 2936 or no on this, something like that, they're hearing from a nonprofit that's in their district. They probably even know about it, right? And that makes a really big difference. And you know what, if you're like me, I hate to make phone calls. I have like practically a phobia about making phone calls. I could never have one of those jobs where, you know, you call people and try to get them to buy a vacuum cleaner or something like that. So, so the idea of being told, like, call your state senator or call your assemblyman, that's just something I don't want to do. Okay. So this is something I learned is a really great tip. And what that is, call after 5 o'clock. Okay, they're not there. All right, so you know that takes the fear out of it. Like I'm thinking, well, what if I call, what am I going to say? What if they say, well, what about this provision? I don't know about that. All right, so I don't, you know, so instead call after 5 or 5:30 to be safe. Okay, and leave a message, and you just have to leave a message that says something like, you know, I'm Jan Masoka from the XYZ nonprofit. We work in your district, helping families that have a member who has Alzheimer's. And I'm just calling to tell you to vote yes on 2257. That's it. And then you hang up. Because what happens every morning is a staff person comes in and they listen to all the messages and they do a tally sheet. How many people said yes on what bill and how many people said no on what bill? And that's just exactly what they do if you call and actually get a person, okay? So it counts the same amount and it's fear-free for somebody like me who hates making telephone calls. And the other thing you might think is, you know, oh gosh, they're going to get like 100 calls. What does it matter if I do or not? Well, Samantha Sang, who's a pal of ours who we work with quite a bit, who's from Next Gen California, and she used to be in the legislator's office. And she says that on an average day while the legislature was in session, how many calls do you think they would get from constituents telling them to vote yes on something or to vote no on something? And she says the answer is 2. Like 2, okay? So that means, you know, like you're leaving that message after hours actually counts a lot, all right? And so that's why, so again, you know, if you join IECC or IE Rise or the California Association of Tree Planting Organizations or Cal Nonprofits, we will be telling you when something comes up and when to make a call. But most of the time we try to do that related to the members of committees. So if we haven't been calling you to ask you to do that, it's probably because your legislators have been voting the right way. And I see a note from Sarah saying that strategy of calling hours has helped her reach out more often. And so Sarah, thanks for that. And you sound like, and David, thank you too. You know what I mean? It's like, it's hard to make those phone calls when you think somebody's going to answer. I even remember when I was in high school and my mother used to nag me and say, you know, you have to get over your fear of making phone calls. And here I am much later and I still really dislike doing it. Here's a great question from Cassie. It's like, what's a good organization for arts programs for youth? To some degree, it depends on arts programs. There's a great network of arts education programs. And there's also a very good state association of community arts centers. So those are 2 things you can probably Google them. And if you can't, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just write my email address, okay, in my chat box. So if you want to reach me directly, you can. Okay, and if you can't find a particular network that you're looking for, you can give me a call, send me an email. And I probably won't answer right away, but I will answer. All right, so I wouldn't be, okay, so one other thing, okay, this is just a little bit harder, but this is something that your board members can do that's pretty easy for them to do. And that is to start with, for example, the city council, all right? Or either a member of the city councils or the heads of departments that you work closely with. So for example, you know, if you help people get get rides to the doctor. You know, it might be want to talk to the people in charge of paratransit or in charge of the Department of the Aging in your city or something like that. And then what you can do is ask your board members for each of them once a year to have a coffee date with one of those city council members. And that's especially easy right now because of course you don't actually have to drive anywhere. We're just everything on Zoom. And if a person calls an office and says, you know, I'm Jan Masaokan, I'm a volunteer for such and such organization, and I would like to have a 15-minute Zoom call with you just so I can let you know, what we do for older people that have a hard time getting out. Because I know your office gets a lot of calls about how they can help their parents about this, and this will give you a resource that you can use. Pretty much every city council member is going to say yes to that request. That's very hard for them to say no to. And then all you simply do is get onto that Zoom call or even just a phone call and say, you know, look, this is what we do. So if you have any families that are asking you about that, now you know. Okay, that's it. There's no ask, there's no demand. You just sit. That's pretty simple and easy, right? And then, but what that's useful for is it's kind of just like, you know, you don't start by asking somebody, right, to go on vacation with you. Start with a coffee date. Okay, so this is the coffee date. And then later on, what happens, what you'll discover is, for example, suddenly the parking zone is changed in front of your organization and nobody can park. Now you know somebody on the city council and you can simply call them. You can say, remember we talked about this. I want to let you know that we're having a problem with the new zone, with the new parking zone. Right. So it's just like you'll never find anybody to go on vacation with you if you never go on any coffee dates. You're never going to find elected officials to help you if you don't go on a few coffee dates. And they don't take very long and they're pretty easy to do. And it's actually very satisfying for board members to do that because they're doing one of the things that board members do best, which is connect the organization to people of influence that are in the community. Is there a state association for homelessness? Sue, let me get back to you on that. Or actually, Susie Gomez may actually know one. Actually, I think it depends on what homeless services that you're working on. I know that there are, for example, associations of affordable housing providers. So I think it depends on what kinds of services. All right, so I also wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't tell you a little bit about where I work, the California Association of Nonprofits. So we don't work on the issues that I've been just talking about, the kinds of issues that affect a particular field, like that affect museums, for example, or affect tree planting organizations, or affect homeless shelters, or ethnic museums, or civil rights organizations, or wildlife conservation. So we work on the kinds of issues that cross the entire nonprofit sector. Right? That's a relatively small band of issues, but it's a very important one. And here's just one example. It's been impossible forever to find out what state grants your organization might be eligible for. Like, let's say you do something around mental health and you're wondering, I wonder if we could get state money for mental health. Well, you might think, okay, I can look on the Department of Health website, but actually you wouldn't know, for example, that actually California Wildfire, Cal Wildfire gives out actually mental health grants. Fish and Wildlife gives out mental health grants. Lots of state departments give out mental health grants, and you'd have to search through all of them, these very arcane websites that are very difficult to navigate. So 2 years ago, we sponsored a bill in the legislature that would mandate the creation of one single website, and that website would have every single grant listed that the state of California has that nonprofits are eligible for, with a link to how to apply. Right? It took us 1.5 years, but we got that bill passed. It was signed into law, and 2 months ago, that website finally went live. And I'm going to put it in grants.ca.org. I'm going to put that in the chat box too, so that later on today, you can look up and see if there are grants available in your geographical area or in your field. So that's an example of something that we work on. It's something that crosses the zone of nonprofit organizations, but it's a little too technical to be on anybody's front burner. So that's just kind of an example. And I just have to say as an aside, there shouldn't have had to be a law to get that done. Somebody out of the many, many people in state government should have thought, hey, let's do this, right? But that didn't work. I mean, we had tried that for 3 years prior to just convincing people, like, isn't this a great idea? And they would all go, yeah, but our department doesn't have time. So, so that's an example of the kind of the work that we do. And in addition, we were able to have a lot of our members participate in a task force that was advising the department and the state government that put that website together. So did some beta testing, for example, particularly with an eye towards making sure that it would be accessible and usable to small nonprofits who are very often, just don't have the bandwidth to do as much searching as other people might have the chance to do. Let's see here. Where's my, looking at my headline here, my outline, sorry. So, all right, so now I'm going to turn to the meaning of life. Okay. Or maybe you guys, actually, Susie, you probably faxed everybody the meaning of life last month, right? So they don't actually need to talk about that.
We're good to go.
Yeah. But I would, let me say a few words about that. So, right now, you all know how difficult a time it is, and it's a difficult time for our nonprofits. It's a difficult time for the people that we serve and work with and represent, and it's a difficult time for us individually. I can't think of a single conversation that I've had with a friend or a relative since March that hasn't involved our saying in some way or another how stressed we are, right? And so it's kind of like having a low-grade fever. We're not depressed enough to be taking medication or something, but we are depressed enough to know that we are suffering from stress. And so from an organizational point of view, I think a lot of what we know from our survey of more than 1,000 nonprofits in California, 14% of nonprofits in California have already closed, right? And others are working at crazy capacities, right? They're serving 3 times more people than they've ever served, right? They're going crazy. They have food banks and Meals on Wheels and organizations like that. And everybody else who's kind of in between is really wondering. We had to cancel our fundraisers, so how are we going to manage? I talked to one person who runs an after-school program for kids and saying, like, we can't put kids in a gym. That's what we do. What are we going to do? And these questions are making a lot of us think, how are we going to survive? Several people wrote in the survey things like, we're trying to pivot, but we don't know what to pivot to, which is a sentiment I really like, because I hate just being told you need to pivot and adapt. It's like, spare me. Okay. All right. Like, to what? All right. So the thing is, I want us to get rid of the word survive. All right. And I want us to use kind of like, search and replace in Word. I want us to switch out and use the word prevail. And I want us to think not in terms of surviving or not even in terms of thriving, but in terms of prevailing. And that's a very different kind of a paradigm or way to think about how our organizations are going to continue to do what they do. And it doesn't mean, prevail doesn't mean we're going to see our enemies like, dead and bleeding at our feet or something like that. Although there are days I think that would be nice, right? And it also doesn't mean that everything's going to come out fine. There's all these people that are always saying things like that. It's all for the good. Like, no, it's not all for the good. All right. And it means something very different. So first, it means saying, this is what we stand for, and this is how we're going to act. Okay, this is what we stand for, and this is how we're going to act. Right? And because when you think about it, that's what we can do, and that's how we will prevail. Right? And the second thing to do is to think that prevail is not the same as having the same budget level that you used to have. Right? There's this implicit idea, like if your budget, whether your budget was $50,000 a year or $5 million or $50 million a year, when you lose income, there's this kind of automatic thing that kicks into us, and it makes us think, if only we could just get back to that, whatever that number was, if we can just get back to that. And, we have to stop thinking about that. And I want to think about what we accomplish as nonprofits. So one thing we accomplish, it's easy to talk about, okay? It's easy to talk about, like the number of people we registered to vote, the number of acres that we saved from development, right? you know, the numbers of people who are contemplating suicide who we spoke to. It's very easy to talk about those kinds of things. But what's less easy to talk about is what we stand for, what we do that is meaningful to people, and the fact that we're creating a sense of community. So let me give you an example. So a few years ago, I talked to a group of women from a public housing location, and they were trying to raise $3,000 because they wanted to buy instruments for a middle school girls drill team. And so we had this great talk, and after they left, I realized though that some other people might say, why are those moms doing that? That should be done by like the YMCA or the YWCA or the Boys and Girls Club. I mean, they have whole purchasing departments that are a lot more better at accounting than these people are ever going to be, right? Why are they doing that, right? But I think, and those are all great organizations, but I think you can intuitively feel, right, that there's something different about a girls drill team that starts from the inside out rather than it's brought in from the outside in. Because what else will they do besides number of hours of drill team practice? They will also create a network of moms that will be useful in a lot of different ways. It will be meaningful to people in the public housing project, even if they don't have girls in that drill team. It says something about a housing project that has its own drill team, right? So these, in fact, every nonprofit, all of us are creating communities around us in the same way that that mom's drill team is creating a community. But those don't sound like deliverables or like outcomes, sort of in today's jargon. So when we return to those things and realize that those are just as important, right, then we can say what prevail means. We may have fewer numbers of families served, but we still have created a community of families of children with such and such an issue, right, that is helping each other, that's created a network that can call state legislators when a bill related to those kids comes up, right? And we are, even if we don't succeed in getting that bill changed or succeed in serving as many families as we would like to serve, then we will still be standing up for what we stand for the people that we stand for, and we will still be taking action. And that's what we mean by prevailing. Prevailing isn't about numbers, okay? Prevailing is about what we stand for and the fact that we act. I appreciate these comments, and I think we have like 2 minutes left. So in a regular in a regular conference, like you can end 2 minutes early and nobody feels weird, or you can even arrive 10 minutes late and nobody feels weird. But in these Zoom meetings and Zoom calls, if you're like 30 seconds late, it feels like somebody's actually late, so that's kind of a crazy thing. But in any case, that's my talk. And again, if you have a hard time finding your state association of people that do things that you do, email me. My email's in the chat box, and I'll get back to you about that. So thanks very much for having me, Susan.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jan. Applause, applause. If we were in really live place, we'd also be applauding for you. Thank you, Jan. As always, you leave us with really thoughtfulness on how we need to, what steps next we need to move forward. For me, I wrote down the thing that stood out was the one law is worth 100 proposals. And it's a powerful statement, but so true. And then at the end, the name of our conference is Prevailing in a Time of Crisis. And I actually remember hearing you say that. So when we were planning this conference, it was the reason we included it in the title. So thank you again, as always, for being a champion of all nonprofits in the region. And we really appreciate your time this morning. So gracias. Thank you.